welcome to the Graphic Novel Club, and congratulations on reading this comic book.
Thank you. There were several.
That is true. That is true. I also brought a special guest with me.
Kitty?
It's a dragon.
I love it.
So this dragon is green. Yes, hide the tacos because they love tacos. But this is also like our main character who is red but wears green, Vision, for our comic book today. So I'm really glad that we can get together to discuss Volume 1 of Vision. This was a very acclaimed book when it was released a few years ago, and there's a lot to get into. I think I just kind of want to bring it over to the group right now and get everyone's opinion on the book. If you liked it, if so, how come? If not, what didn't jive with you? And I'll just start off with Mike. What were your thoughts on Vision?
Well, this was my favorite Marvel comic of the past probably 17 years. The closest thing to it would be Alan Moore's Swamp Thing Anatomy Lesson.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of parts of this book that slightly remind me of that, but overall, unfortunately, Tom King's other work is not as good as this, but it feels like he had the whole story planned from beginning to end, which is rare, and he utilized that to its fullest by foreshadowing things that came later in the story. And I mean, there's a million things I could talk about, but I really hope that that once they're done WandaVision, that this is the next thing, because this story deserves to be adapted. I think it's incredible.
Nice, thank you. Anything else you want to add before we go on to someone else?
Yeah, I guess I'll just say, I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of debate about whether superhero comics should be for adults, for kids, blah, blah, blah. But I think this is an example of a superhero comic that's for adults, but it doesn't pander to violence and graphic sex. It just explores more complex themes, more adult themes, and it uses superheroes as a metaphor rather than just, these supervillains want to fight Spider-Man, and that's the story, which we'll be reviewing tomorrow on Here Comes the Spider-Cast. But in any case, this is the way to do superhero comics for adults, I think. This is good stuff.
Hey, great. Thanks, Mike. So, Alicia, I know you're going to have to transcribe your thoughts, so if you don't mind, I'll read them out loud after you type them. What were your opinions on Vision? So, I'm just going to take the liberty to read Alicia's brief thoughts on the book. It's not what I was expecting. I was sort of expecting something like Bewitched, a supernatural family trying to blend in when zany shenanigans ensue. I didn't love it, but I didn't hate it. I'm kind of in the middle. I like the art. So, okay, that's great. You know what? Not to press your fingers too much, but what was it specifically that you liked about the art? The colors and some of the interesting poses and layouts of panels, like when the brother throws the ball out the window and the dog goes to get it while Vision is standing on the lawn. Yeah, that is a great sequence. Thanks for bringing that up. Also, the dog is amazing. Anytime that there's a robot dog, I'm always happy in a comic book. All right. Thank you, Alicia. I want to move on. Jolie, what were your thoughts on the graphic novel?
I think this is like the third time I've read this. So, but no, I would say third. Okay. I really enjoyed it. It was a little bit dark. So it was kind of spooky. But yeah, I really enjoyed this. Tried to read other Tom King. So like Mike, I agree that it's probably one of the best things that Tom King has written for Marvel. I highly recommend it. I didn't like the art as much, but I did like the coloring. the thing that I didn't like about the art was just it felt like unfinished comic book art. It almost felt like independent, like a creator-owned title or an artist from a creator-owned title. But this, like Alicia, there are parts of the story that I also didn't enjoy. But the way that they dealt with more adult themes was really well done and very interesting.
So you did mention the way it handled more adult themes. I'm wondering, was there any storyline element in particular that you can think of that you thought was handled really well?
Yeah. The I both, and this is like I have a love-hate with this storyline, is the storyline of Virginia. Particularly well is what happened between the father of the high school, the bully, and just everything that happened to them, like the murder, the accidental, the manslaughter that happened, like that stuff is pretty dark, and I was surprised that it was in this comic. Like the way that Virginia handled the family's affairs became very dark, and I still don't understand. I still don't know if I think it was too dark.
Okay, well, thank you for that.
You're welcome.
And Julie.
Hello. Okay, so I lied. Not the only comic book or my first comic book. I probably have like Casper the Friendly Ghost or like the Flintstones to compare to this. So I have to say, definitely a step up. Okay. Where do I? Okay, so I have absolutely no knowledge of any superheroes other than like what I see in movies. I have to say, not super impressed by the way the book looked. It looked, like Jolie said, unfinished. Like somebody just sketched some things in some notepad and colored it in with some pencil crayons and put it together and called it a book. I kind of like how stabby the wife is, because like I know how you like you guys are just talking about that, and it's like way. um, like I get it. Like she's just trying to protect her family. I feel like I can relate. I don't know if I would like step on anybody's heads or anything, but I I kind of I kind of like Virginia. Not in like a I'm down with murderers kind of way, but in a, you know, mom life kind of way. I feel like it's been months since I read this because I read it so quickly. It was okay. Oh, thanks. Um, like I didn't hate it. Like thinking back on like reading it, I didn't hate it. I just kind of like read it and thought, huh, okay. Uh, now what? Like, I wasn't sure what to think about it, and mostly because I don't read comic books. I think the story was good. Like it kept me interested. Vision, I didn't care for. Like this character of Vision, not a big fan. The kids, I don't know, they were just kids. What else can I say? But yes, I have to agree with Alicia. I'm always down with a robot dog.
Well, I definitely admitted that too, so I'm really glad about some solidarity for
I
robot
thought you were
dogs.
transcribing what she said. Well, I
Some of
agree.
it.
I'm always down when there's a
Well,
robot animal.
awesome, thank you.
Hmm.
So now we're at the point where I want to unpack some of the themes of the book. Before I do that, though, one important thing I noted is that this is deeply steeped in Marvel mythology. there is so much about the history of the Avengers, Vision's background. Even though it's a pretty self-contained story, there's a lot of allusions and a lot of elements taken from decades worth of continuity. Did all that continuity, did all the Marvel mythology make you feel confused at all while you were reading this narrative, or did you pretty much understand what was happening?
Can I give a perspective of someone who's read a lot of those?
Yes, please do, Mike.
Okay, I think it was handled well because, for example, when he says, I've saved the Earth 37 times or whatever, it doesn't, I can't stand that trope back in the 60s to the 80s when they would have, if you read Avengers number 26, and then they list all the issues you have to read. That drives me crazy. The way that it was done here was right. It's like, it's just a fact, it happened, and then later Vision lists them all and goes through them, but it's not to get you to buy it, it's not to get you to read it, it's to expand on his character and all the things he's done. And so this is also why I hate reboots, because I don't like characters starting over from scratch every couple of years. I'd rather have them build on Marvel history. And I think this is a great way to do it. It's just drop it in as a fact. And again, it's like any good movie or any good story. You kind of start in the middle of the action and you reference things that happened in the past. And whether you know all the full details of those stories or not isn't important. It's just important to know that the Vision is an important character. He's a hero, and he's done a lot of good for humanity. I think that's all you need to know.
Okay. So Alicia did say that's a fair point, although she also typed, it confused me a tiny bit. Alicia, maybe you could just articulate some points that you found confusing. And while you're typing, maybe someone else might just want to chime in and say, did you find the story confusing, or could you follow along with it with all the different characters and allusions to stuff that happened in Vision's past?
That's either me or Julie.
Well, yep.
Yeah. I didn't. So is it Blacklight Lane? What's his name? The man who comes for them at the beginning that Virginia kills and buries.
Grim Reaper.
That's it, the Grim
Yeah.
Reapers. So he comes, and it's just one line of dialogue that introduces him. It's like, I'm so and so's stepbrother.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Or
confusing,
yeah. Well, well, that's the thing, is that like when he comes to the house, it's very explained very quickly, which is fine, and like you immediately get it. And they didn't. Whereas since I've been reading Silver Age, 80s comics,
Bronze
Age comics, in a Bronze Age comic, they would spend 2 full pages worth of telling you the backstory between this character and how he relates to the Vision in like flashback sequences. And it's annoying. The idea that they don't do that here is wonderful. They get to the point of who this person is, and you quickly know that he's trying to kill. It's like a kill or be killed situation. And I think that's one thing that is flawed, like Mike said, that's flawed with comics, is that they don't know how to handle they don't know how to handle, or they've in the past handled poorly, the way that they explain the introduction of a character that someone might not be familiar with. It's like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what 37 fights happened between that Vision was involved in with the Avengers. He just needs to know that there are 37, and he quantifies. It's quantified by him because he's a robot, or a synthezoid, I should say. Like, that's how he looks at it. And that's what's important, not every single thing that happened in those fights. Now, to be fair, they do go into detail about some of the fights, but they don't go into detail about all of them. And it's a really great, it makes for a really like cool break in the narrative. Like it's illustrated the same, but it's colored differently. So you know that they're kind of like flashbacks. And it's done very cleanly. It's not fight number 1, fight number
Mhm.
2, all the way to fight through to fight 37. It's that happened. I did this, and that happened during this fight, because he has a very compartmentalized brain. So
Mhm.
he presents these flashbacks in such a way that it benefits the story and it's not just superfluous.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Right, right. Yeah. I know Julie hasn't said anything, but I just want to say the key thing Jolie said is it has to add to the story. All the information should add to the story. It should only be in the book if it adds to the story, and that's why even though people have nostalgia for them, I can't stand those flashbacks. And Jolie and I have been seeing so much of that in Spider-Man 80s comics, and it's just annoying. But anyway, I'll stop talking.
Well, actually, just before we move on, I want to bring up some points that Alicia typed out. And I think these are really good points to talk about. I asked, why was some of the book confusing? And she typed, just because it made me feel like there was a lot going on. For instance, alluding to the relationship with Scarlet Witch and how he had kids with her. And Alicia was left very confused about what happened with that and how he ended up with a wife he had made himself. So, fair point. There's continuity issues there. How did this happen? Why is this character, Scarlet Witch, so important? I was also having trouble reconciling the character with the Vision and Scarlet Witch from the movies, which I think for people who are introduced to these characters from an adaptation like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, yeah, that can be a big issue because there's a lot of license and extrapolation taken with these characters on the screen compared to how they've been traditionally depicted in comics. And I think anytime you have an adaptation that's very popular, like the MCU, and you go back to decades worth of continuity, there's going to be discord. And when I like this point that you made, Alicia, you also read the second volume and you're still confused about some stuff of the Scarlet Witch. And I do have to agree here. I know a bit about the continuity. So, what I know is that Scarlet Witch and Vision had an ongoing romantic history. And beyond that, there's so many dramatic interludes that have happened, as are the case with comic book superhero romances. It's easy to lose track. Um, the only thing I knew from this book was that they weren't together anymore, and they were together at one point. Um, we won't touch too much on that since we're only focusing on the first volume in this conversation, but definitely that former relationship with Scarlet Witch becomes a big cornerstone for the second volume. So maybe one day we'll touch upon that volume. But yeah, I do think, actually, rather than me speculate, Julie, you're someone who hasn't read many comics outside of Casper, like you said. So going into this book, did you find the allusions to all these different characters and storylines confusing? Did it take you out of being able to enjoy the story?
Yes. I don't know anything about these people. So, people. But you know what? Like, I do know, like, I don't know when it takes place because I've been introduced to the characters, like, at a certain point in time or certain points in time. So I know certain things about them or like like a little smudge of their history, if you will. But if you're just like for me looking at it, I was like, okay, I'm just gonna read this. This is what is it? The first book about Vision? Okay, no.
No, the first solo series, but he had been around in the comics for decades before this.
Oh, okay.
The first in a while.
Okay. So when was this published?
2015, I want to say.
Really? I thought. Okay. Really? Okay. Okay. Okay, I get it. I'm sorry. I'm just like in my head going over what is like happening in the movies at this point. Okay. So when I picked up the book and read it, the only thing I didn't understand was why his character was so the way he was in the book and not, I don't know. I expected him to be a little more human.
Mm.
I wanted to see other things happening. I don't know. There wasn't a whole lot going on in it for me. There, I clearly haven't had enough dinner, but like I'm having a really hard time like trying to form my thoughts.
No, it's fine. You know,
To me, it was like a synthezoid is trying to have a family, and I didn't really understand what else was supposed to be happening.
Mhm. Well,
It was just trying to fit in.
well, and I think that's actually a good question because what is going on is, I think, kind of the main point of the book, or the point it's trying to make. So I actually think that's a valid question. What is the book trying to say?
Question. I didn't have a hard time following because I
Okay.
really like the book itself is fine the way it is. Like from
Yeah.
as an outsider knowing nothing about anything and reading it, it was like, okay, robot man and family. Things happen. Needed nothing else to understand.
Okay.
Except for the parts when there was like flashbacks of like the Scarlet Witch. That was about it.
Mhm.
Okay, go
And,
on.
and maybe the guy with the big hook hand coming through the door. I mean, that too.
I do this thing where I repress negativity, so he wasn't a big deal for me.
You know, he got killed by a frying pan. Oh no, it was a cookie sheet. So you know, it's okay.
Yeah.
He was done in 5 pages.
They weren't going to eat those cookies anyway, so.
I was gonna say, I think that the Grim Reaper showing up was the most comic booky scene in this comic, and I don't think it's. And if you know, if 10 out of 10 is perfect, that part might make it a 9 out of 10, because it's maybe the only scene that needs explanation. It's the only scene that's not that violates it being self-contained, because you kind of have to know, okay, who's this guy? Where does he come from? How is he connected? You know, so it's not perfect, but everything else in the book I think is perfect. And like I said, my favorite thing, if I can just mention a line of dialogue, can I go that into detail?
Please.
The part of the book that made me feel like I was in safe hands, and like it reminded me of Alan Moore, was when that couple comes in the first issue and they drop off the flowers or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
And then as they're walking away, narrating, he says, later, near the end of our story, one of the visions will set George and Nora's house on fire. They will die in the flames. And I was like, oh my God, okay, here we go. I like what I'm in for.
They brought the cookies that led to the Grim Reaper's death by pan.
Right. Okay, right.
Full circle. Death
Amazing.
cookies. Just a point that Alicia brought up. She says she feels like a better way to do this would have been to have the son accidentally kill someone at school. Maybe he doesn't know his own strength, or his emotions get the better of him, and then his mom tries to cover it up. Yeah, so a variation on the theme that's being presented here with this family who is trying to cover up this event. And in this case, the mother trying to cover up this event from Vision. You know, I just want to address one thing that Mike was talking about, because I do feel there is a case where some comics can do this successfully, where they set up the appearance of a widespread history and it still is accessible for new readers. And I'm going to bring up a cliche, but I'm going to bring up Watchmen. Watchmen basically had all these different story arcs that were introduced, all this background, all this history that didn't really get followed up. The basic idea was, well, here's a bad guy that these superheroes fought in the 70s, and that's all you really needed to know. I thought that was great. And I think in a self-contained story, it doesn't matter how much continuity or background you have, something like this, you can still have a self-contained story that's accessible because you just need to know the bare bones. Grim Reaper, he's a guy with a big hook on his hand. He's probably up to no good. So, you know, I think that explanation is good enough by itself. Obviously, this is a superhero android who's just trying to live a nice suburban home life now. And the supervillain's coming in just to disrupt that. For me, I have no idea who Grim Reaper is. I think he looks very ridiculous. But I wasn't bothered too much about that because for me, I felt okay. He's a bad guy. I don't know who Wonder Man is, but I can use my imagination. I can infer.
Uh,
But go ahead.
I was gonna ask a question. I didn't even realize until now. Did you only assign the first 6 issues?
I did.
So that means that Julie and Alicia only read the first 6. Oh, Julie, you read all 12?
I read the full volume.
Okay, and Alicia, did you read all 12?
Alicia did because she ended up reading the second volume as well.
Oh, gotcha. I was gonna say because I didn't want to say much more if people hadn't read the end of the story. Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, so I had mentioned, I'm like Alicia's saying, I had mentioned that I think in a thread, it's like you're gonna want to read volume 2 because
Right.
it gets even juicier.
And because that's the end, like the story's done, so it's
Yeah.
hard to review the first half of the story. But anyway,
Well, maybe we can get into the second half a little bit then, since everyone has read it. I wasn't sure if anyone would want to go on to that second volume, so we can talk about that a bit. I do want to address some of the themes of the book, and something that I was bringing up, kind of tailing off of what Julie was saying, was what is the book actually about? If you could kind of just put it in a nutshell, what the theme, moral, idea of the book is, what would you say that it is?
I think it's a metaphor for immigration, assimilation. Oh, is that? Wait, you're on mute, Julie.
Oh, there was like a little message on the screen that popped up about being something you're not, and I was like, "Ooh, me." I like that.
Oh, okay.
And that's from Alicia, trying to be something you're not, as an idea for what the theme of the book is. And okay, Mike, I know you were also saying immigration.
Like assimilation, like this, and like the Norman Rockwell type covers, but
Juxtaposed.
juxtaposed with the fact that they're androids, but they're in this Norman Rockwell Americana, I think shows like the idea of assimilation.
Strong agreement from Alicia here.
And I know that partly inspired WandaVision, just that idea, even though it's a completely different story.
So, okay, we'll get to possibly talking about WandaVision in a little bit, but just going back to Vision. Okay, Julie, what are your thoughts going into this? It's one of your more recent comic forays.
Come on, Julie, hot takes only.
Excuse me.
Oh, you mean like, what do I think it's about?
Yeah.
I honestly think Vision is desperately like trying to be something he's not. Did anybody else feel that? Like he wants to be this family man. He wants to have this, or I don't. And did I feel it from his wife a little bit? I don't know, but like he just desperately wants for everybody to be normal in whatever he thinks normal might be, and they're just not it.
So
Yeah.
So I think that both maybe are correct. That like they um they're they are trying to be normal, but they're trying to be normal, as in they're trying to fit in with everybody else in the neighborhood. But also, they're also trying to be their version of normal, which interferes with the neighborhood's normal. So like everyone's just trying to be cordial. Like the neighbors bring over cookies and they don't even know if, you know, these people eat cookies. Um, there's many different levels of normalcy in this book that are being examined, but it's just people trying to people. It's just beings trying to be, and just their little pocket of the neighborhood coping with what that means.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't know that anybody, the neighbors or the visions, even know what that means or understand what it could mean.
Mm-hmm.
And then when someone like the Grim Reaper comes in and interferes with this like test or normalcy experiment, it kind of derails in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And
You
it
mean
reminds
it derails their quest or it derails the story?
well, I mean, it does derail their quest because suddenly Virginia becomes a murderer. Um, it- yeah. And it also it derails the reader, I guess, as well. If we are in fact meant to be thinking about um, particular themes, it's hard to think of a theme when they, introduce a giant pirate with a hook hand trying to kill them.
Uh,
Yeah,
Go ahead, Mike.
I was gonna say if that was adapted into a Disney Plus TV show, he'd be wearing jeans and a t-shirt. They'd get rid of that, right? Anyway,
I just want to bring up a point that Alicia had typed out. She wrote, I get the sense that Vision is seeking fulfillment in a family. Maybe there is regret with Scarlet Witch, as is hinted at the joke he shares with his robot wife, which is in reference to issue 7, where it opens up with the scene of post-coital bliss with, or ennui, it's kind of hard to tell, but Scarlet Witch and Vision in bed. He tells her a joke, and at the end of the issue, going through time, it shows his relationship with Scarlet Witch, and at the very end of the issue, it's him in bed with his wife, and he says the same joke. And as Alicia wrote, he's chasing the feeling of love, perhaps something he could never have. The relationship is like the vase full of water that no one can drink because it will kill them.
Yeah. And it's like they're they could never be together. I mean, as we see in Volume 2, Scarlet Witch naturally, her love progresses in a different way, like in a divergent path. She finds herself with somebody else, and maybe it's not so much that he's seeking fulfillment. Fulfillment is that he didn't want that circumstance with the Scarlet Witch to change. Like he thought everything was fine, and his ass was being cheated on. So
Mhm.
I
This
don't know.
is no, I think that's a good point. This reminds me a lot of what happens in sci-fi and fantasy narratives, where you have a synthetic human or an android introduced. It's often a very typical story of the android representing the chase or the understanding of what exactly it means to be human. I'm not created to be human, but I'm human adjacent. So how do I become fully human? What does humanity even mean? I feel this was a theme being approached in the book. I guess my question to you was, did it present an answer? Did Vision try in any way to answer the question, what does it mean to be human?
Sorry, ask that again.
Okay, basically, in this book, I got one of the themes is the question, what does it mean to be human? What does humanity mean? Do you feel the book provided an answer? Not necessarily a good answer, but it did attempt to answer that question. I know Alicia just typed in some ways yes, because in the end of the second volume, he and Viv have to pick up and accept what they are and carry on despite their differences. So kind of a human aspect in that way, the growth, progression.
If in fact it is human to be able to see and identify the differences in all beings and to live with those differences or find or create a world in which we can live together, then yes, this is about being human. Um, this is about what it means to quote be human, despite being a robot.
Can I oh, you done? Okay, because I was going to bring this up for a different point, but I think addresses what you're asking right now, Adam. In number 6, this is probably my favorite issue. When the theme or whatever the running theme of the issue is the computer problem P versus NP, and Vision explains what it is. Basically, it's the difference between an easily solvable problem or a problem that has to be solved by a computer through going through infinite possibilities. And then basically, Vision says, where is it? However, you ask the computer to, so the computer without its shortcut will simply run through practically infinite number of possibilities, trying to stumble on the correct one. So then he says, a computer can solve everything. If NP does not equal P, then there are simply problems, blah, 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 and blah, blah. So I'm trying to find the point. But basically, he ends up saying, so basically, the question is, are they the same thing? Because a computer can solve all problems. And if that is true, if all NP problems are in fact simply P problems awaiting our effort, then a computer could solve, for lack of a better term, everything. All the secrets from the clash of atoms to the clash of galaxies would be unveiled. We would see them. They would be ours. So I think that's kind of what he's saying is, it's almost like he's saying we can solve these problems, but it's almost like, do we have to live them to solve them? Or, I think this issue is kind of like bringing the theme to the forefront. Because right here he says, alternatively, if NP does not equal P, then there simply are problems with solutions the computers cannot solve. So he's asking it right there. And again, I don't know if that's answered at the end, but I think that is the central theme of the book right there.
I think that's great. It picks up on a major theme running throughout the course of the first half of the book, and I think you're onto something. In terms of asking what does it mean, this reminds me of a section from issue, it's either 7 or 8, I believe it's 8, where Vision is actually walking around an art gallery with Victor, and they come across, this is, wow, very prophetic, an image of Mickey Mouse in an art gallery. So he ends up looking at it and saying, and I quote, "Do you ever wonder, Victor, what does any of this mean?" And of course, it's talking about elements happening within the story. It's talking about life. It's talking about literally the art on the wall. What does this mean? And maybe that's kind of the theme of Vision in its own way. Rather than presenting outright a direct answer of what it means to be human. And I do think it approaches that question in a number of different ways. It simply is positing a question, what does any of this mean? And not really having, I guess, a satisfying answer, which to me gives this a greater sense of reality in spite of synthezoids and giant pirates busting through your walls and flying aliens. There's still something about that is so refreshingly candid and human to admit, I wonder what all of this means, and I just don't think I can come up with a solution, which actually parallels what you said, Mike, with the problems.
That's actually a quick side note. When it comes to science fiction, I don't like when things are explained as far as like the origin of a species. For example, our favorite, fictional alien race, the Transformers, right? Well, in the old comics, they evolved naturally. Gears and pulleys became intelligent and they learned how to, grow. But in the newer comics, they have this full explanation for who created them and how they did it. And to me, since humans don't know exactly how they're created, if I were to read about an alien species, I would expect their origins to be as mysterious. So to me, it's more interesting that the Vision cannot come to a definite conclusion about what it means to be human or what you have to do to solve these problems, because you could make a comic about humans, about what it means to be human, and it's impossible to have an answer at the end. And if you did, it would feel artificial, right, and forced. So
I think that's actually a good point. And I was not expecting to work Transformers into this conversation at all, but I'm glad someone did.
Any way I can.
So that's definitely a major question to ask about what happens throughout the course of the book. I guess the next question is to ask about the characters. How did you feel about the Vision family? Was there anything that you didn't like? Was there anything that really resounded with you? Yeah. Okay, so Alicia wrote, I felt the kids were kind of flat.
I agree with Alicia. They were just, not only were they flat, they were annoying at times. Like, I mean, you don't expect a 10-year-old to be a super genius. 13? I don't know. 10 to 13, like the boy. You don't expect him to be a super genius, but you expect a synthezoid programmed to look like a 10-year-old to not make foolish mistakes, or to at least have been programmed enough experience to like to the point where he walks in on his uncle and completely he gives away his presence and like I don't know, it seems so strange that they would, because I think that they address it at one point where it's like where the daughter says I'm a synthezoid with the body I'm meant to be 16. Is that what a 16-year-old does?
Mhm.
So I don't know. I don't know if we're meant to understand them to be smarter or what, because in my mind, in science fiction, robots, despite the exterior, are all robotic interior. Like they should have the same age level. I don't know. That's the wrong word because they don't have age levels, right? So it's like I don't know.
But don't they address that? I don't remember. Don't they say somewhere in there that it's part of the programming that they're learning or something like that? So
Yes, there is a point where they reference that.
so yeah, I think that explains why they're making mistakes, right? But
No,
I don't know.
it's the daughter. That's what I said.
Mhm.
So they program her to. She's like, yeah, I'm programmed to look like a 16-year-old, or I'm in the body of a 16. Oh, whatever. Never mind.
Mhm.
You're right. They do. They do say that I'm programmed with the mind of a 16-year. What you know what I mean?
Mhm.
What I also
Well,
think is interesting. Oh, I'm sorry, Jolie, go ahead.
no, I was gonna say it doesn't matter. It doesn't change the fact that they were not great.
Mhm. I don't want to say it removes that criticism at all, but going off of what Mike said, what I think is interesting at the very least, and what we have to keep in mind is that these are just not teenagers. These are synthezoids created by another synthezoid who is not human in the biological definition, who doesn't understand human capacities for emotion or cognition the same way that other people do. So he's creating a family based on his idea of what a family ought to be. And while criticizing the American dream is by and large a bit hackneyed now because almost every writer has done it over the past 70 years, maybe there is something to this, talking about creating the idealized suburban family and seeing the latent flaws in that, including flat, seemingly inhuman children.
Alicia just brought up a point about
Mm.
one of them like incorporating Shakespearean quotes into the book where the boy is constantly repeating it, and then I think that the metaphor that they were using that made it really hard to deal with the character, because it's like then I had to remember Hamlet, and then or was it Hamlet or the Merchant of Venice?
Merchant of Venice, yeah.
Yeah, it's like then I had to remember Merchant of Venice, and then I had to compare the boy's life to the Merchant of Venice and how the two parallel. And then the uncle is like, "Oh, I remember when I was that age, I was obsessed with whatever story." And then I had to remember that story And then I had to concoct, you know, parallels for that uncle. And it's like that kind of confused the whole thing. The if we were meant to think about their experiences in the human world, then adding Shakespeare seemed really pretentious.
Here's the thing: is I've obviously seen that done before. I mean, it's been done since the '60s, just throwing in Shakespeare quotes or whatever. So you could argue it's a cliche at this point, but I don't know. I didn't mind. It wasn't. Yeah. Again, it's not quite a 10 out of 10, but yeah, whatever. I thought it was okay.
So, what I'm curious about then, we might as well get to the. Oh, sorry. Before I go on with my question, I just want to read out loud something Alicia wrote. I really liked how Viv kept repeating the conversation with that other boy, how she kept saying, "It just goes right through me." I thought that was more effective than the Shakespeare. I agree. I thought that was a very profound sequence that she was going through. And in fact, I would say I think Victoria's whole arc actually, not Viv, but Victoria, or I'm saying Victoria, it's Virginia, pardon me. Virginia's arc at the end that leads to the climax of the final issue was very heartrending for me. I'm not trying to be too punny here, but it was just one of those situations where I felt like she was trying so hard to live up to this ideal of what she thought she was created for, and she just couldn't succeed no matter what. And I felt there was something very inherently tragic about that, even more than Viv. Viv, who kept on talking about all these emotions she was facing, I felt that the mother, Virginia, actually was probably the most tragic character out of them all. I'm not sure what your thoughts were on her.
Maybe I'm not remembering this correctly.
Mm-hmm.
But wasn't she always going like almost like the way like a 20-year-old would just be stressed out about like your husband, your oh sorry, the way I used to be stressed out about my husband's ex. Like always thinking like whenever Wanda whenever the subject of Wanda would come up, she would just kind of like she was just pictured like just retreated into herself in fetal position, just like, and it kind of goes with what you're saying is like how she could just never be what she thought she was created for, which was like, if I'm being created in this woman's image, which I thought was what she was created for. Am I wrong? Like, did that come across to anybody else too? Like, she was supposed to be created like as a replacement Wanda.
I think so. I think as a surrogate for sure.
That's it. And she was just, I felt sad for her, like a lot. And I was just like, girl, same. Like, like I'm not there in my life right now, but I was, and I feel you. Like, I mean, I'm not a robot that was created in my husband's like ex's shadow or anything, but like,
well, hopefully none of us are. But with that said, I think you hit on something that it's near the end of the final issue, and it's actually the scene where Virginia dies in Vision's arms. And there's that text that in the red boxes that leads over to the next page, and it's dialogue from Scarlet Witch where she says, Virginia did the right thing, or she did the wrong thing, or she did what everyone does. She saved what she could. So for me, that was very telling dialogue. I loved that part because it really said that, especially when you have it set in the superhero universe where it's so easy to create these binaries of good guys and bad guys, good morals versus overt ambition leading to villainous behavior. This is just a really humane moment of saying she probably was human. Going back to that question we asked before, by saying she is just as messed up as any of us, and she did good and bad, and she tried to save what she could to the best of her ability. Alicia typed something, and I actually like this. I think it's talking about the relationship with Virginia. It's almost an Adam and Eve sort of thing, which I thought about as well. She's made in her husband's image, and she's trying hard not to succumb to the forbidden fruit. But in trying so hard, she fails, and it's quite sad that she couldn't just be herself.
Yeah, and not only is she trying super hard, but every effort to try like ends extremely poorly. Like in murder in every case.
Worst case scenario.
Poor girl.
Worstest case scenario every single time. Like, and that's the worst luck of all. Like, she has the worst luck, can't understand it, knows that she was created from Wanda, has to live with that every day. Like, the plant that sits beside the undrinkable vase is a plant that was given to Wanda and Vision for their wedding from Agatha Harkness. Did they talk about eating the plant in this one?
It was referenced, I think, more in the middle of the story arc.
Okay. Yeah. I don't think she ate it, but the dog definitely did.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, like, it's crazy. Everything around her, even despite her being autonomous from his past relationship, everything she sees is a reminder, including herself, that Wanda is still very, very much a part of Vision's life.
Mm-hmm.
So she's got to deal with that, but also she's got to deal with like murder.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's really crazy. It's a really crazy thought, because if we're talking about being human, you wouldn't think that like casual murder is part of being human, but maybe unchecked passion and jealousy or emotions are.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is an examination of what happens when it goes unchecked, and like, when they manifest in AI, then we're all in for it.
Also, a great comment by Alicia, if everyone wants to check the chat.
Nice. Yes. Am I the only one that just commits casual murder on the fly? I'm not going to
Incriminate yourself?
Correct.
I just want to say that's also something they touch on in 2001: A Space Odyssey, is that essentially the moment Hal becomes intelligent, the first thing he does is lie, the second thing he does is murder. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of maybe a sad commentary on what it means to be human, but it's just interesting that there's a parallel there.
Not that I want to give Josh Whedon any credit, because I'm over that guy right now, but referencing Buffy the Vampire Slayer Season 2 in the episode Passion, there is a great quote there about what it means to be human, which is basically about passion. And I think while it is a bit of a simplification, I think it's also very profound, that in the end, it's the passions that make us human, that give us reason for being, for living. And as much as Vision is trying so hard to have this ideal life, he is already human. He has passion, he has desire, he has pain and trauma, and it's almost as if he can't even accept the fact that he should view himself as being human. That is the cause of all this. In the end, and then it's Virginia, but I think Virginia is the most human of them all. I agree, Alicia. I agree with your comment. I don't have too much more to say about it, but I do think there's a very meaty story here. I think I'm kind of in the middle. I really do like this book a lot. I don't think it's perfect. I don't think it nears perfection, exactly whatever that definition is. It's all relative to each one of us, I know. But I think for what it tackles, the themes that this book addresses are much more mature and nuanced than a book about a red-skinned flying robot should be. And I think, as you indicated, Mike, it does indicate what comics for adults can achieve. And yeah, I think I would just leave it there. In terms of comparisons with WandaVision, no one spoil anything because I'm waiting for every single episode to be released before I watch it. But I know some of the setup is inspired by this. Storyline wise, obviously, is very different. But has anyone here watched WandaVision? Mike, you have, right?
Jolie has a podcast about WandaVision.
Oh, really? Can we give that a plug?
Yeah, I watch it every Friday morning at 6:30, just so it's not spoiled because some things have been spoiled. This week's the last episode, and it's great. The only thing I'll say for you non-regular comic book readers is if you were to look at Marvel's, what is it, 80-year history or whatever it is, WandaVision has taken the characters from about 1964 to about 1989 in 8 episodes. So that gives you an idea of the way that Marvel history works. Like you were saying, Julie, you don't understand where Vision is in the story. Like he's not the way he was in the show. But like I said, they've kind of left us off at about 1989. So there's still 30 more years to go. So who knows where he'll be, the next time we see him.
Yeah, he could be going through his own pirate phase. You never know.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, that is the difficult thing about adaptations. Because you get into them, you have a very Cliff Notes presentation of a character, and then you go into a comic book that's been going on for God knows, sometimes like 80 years, depending on the character, and they have decades of continuity and storylines and character progression, hopefully, at that point. So you're sometimes wondering, how come Spider-Man is like this in the movie, but he's not like this in the comic book? And I don't think that's a small criticism. I think that's a whole other conversation, but it definitely is food for thought. One other thing I want to bring up that Alicia typed, could we discuss what they do with the medium that makes the story best told as a comic and not in another format, which is the question we usually ask. Did this have to be told as a graphic novel or a comic? Would it have been more effective as another medium like film or a TV show, for example? Alicia wrote, I didn't see anything terribly unique done with the medium. Before I get anyone else's thoughts, I'm just going to say I agree. I actually like the art style. I like the kind of scratchier, unfinished look. I thought the rawness of the art actually paralleled the rawness of the emotion of the story for me. But in terms of it doing anything unique to the comic book format or medium, I didn't really see anything. But Jolie, Julie, Mike, what are your thoughts?
I think that it was necessary. I agree that there is nothing unique to comics that happened in the panels of this book other than the story that it told. And that is an important thing to have happened, because up until now, we're used to like flights of fancy and fun. And this is an example of a story that is, quote, gritty, but that doesn't have to be depicted in like darkness. And like they still used full colors. They still used cartoon illustration. They just told a different type of story, and it's a story that it's actually a good story, and it's the type of well-written story that needs to exist in comics, because so many poorly written stories exist that people lift up as being like, sacred. And to me, this is an example of a good story. So it's not so much about what can comics do differently. It's about the fact that this is a comic and it affects people who already read comics. It gives them something different that they should be paying attention to, I believe.
Yeah, I don't think this does anything specifically innovative, but even though I don't think the art is spectacular, I think the key thing I think it was you that said, Adam, that how scratchy it is. Like you can actually see the lines of the figures go outside the panel borders, which is very unusual. And at first I didn't like it, but then I thought, this is the key, I think, is that it's actually more impressive that our human brains can accept this comic booky looking art and have it tell a good story, because it goes against the instinct or like your first instinct to think, well, if it's a serious story, it has to be dark and it has to be realistic. But this story proves Scott McCloud's theory, which is no, it's the opposite. When the artwork is more comic booky, more cartoony, it's better at telling an emotional story. And I think that is what makes it unique. Even though you could translate this to film almost one for one, like every panel could, you could stage it the way it's done in the comic. I still think that the scratchiness of the art, like you said, adds to the story.
There is a sequence in the final issue. I don't think it's a uniquely drawn or arranged panel sequence, but it's when Vision is embracing Virginia because she admitted that she has uploaded her confession that she's going to die. There is just 4 panels surrounding a central panel, which is that floating water that she's ingested. That to me is what is unique about that. You could do quick cuts in a film where it's a sequence of a close-up of Vision's face, a far shot of both Virginia and Vision in the same sequence, then cut to the water. But having that water center in the page with all the other image surrounding it, there is something unique where I think good comic art is sequential, but it also allows you to look at things in a juxtaposed way where you can just see these 5 panels on this page, and that in and of itself stands out as a piece of art. And for me, when I said I like the art in this book, that sequence stood out for me as being exceptional. Yeah, the pencils are a bit scratchy, the colors are a little bit murky, but for me, it's the framing of it is so exceptional. I just thought that was such a powerful page. And there are other pages like that. There's ones I don't quite like, especially when it gets into the more comic booky elements. I hate saying that because it sounds so derogatory, but the superhero battle, the part where Grim Reaper comes in, the action sequences actually I felt were very sloppy. I didn't like those. It's
right.
The quiet moments. The quiet moments are done wonderfully in this book, in my opinion.
No, I agree. Like even when she gets stabbed by the Grim Reaper, it just doesn't. It's not well depicted. He's not really great at action, but I think you're right. I think again, this goes back to it's more important that the artist puts thought into the layout of the page and how to tell the story than how well they can draw muscles, which is what typical superhero fans think good art is how accurate the muscles are and blah blah blah. Whereas the thought put into designing the page that way with that water thing in the middle, I didn't even think about that, but you're right. Even if you were to put that in a movie and you were to film it, okay, here's the first shot, here's the second shot, it would not have the same effect because film is, it's a continuous medium, and this is, I don't know what you'd call this, more tactile medium. I don't know.
And that's the thing too, is that when you interpret, like if you were to literally interpret that page on the screen, it's I associate that kind of imagery with like video art, like experimentation in video, where it's like overlay, and if it were to be in a film, it would be viewed, I think, as amateurish. So it really, that kind of thing just does not translate well to film. Not that I've seen, at least. Scott Pilgrim did it okay. Actually, it did it like 100% well. But that's because, they did different things. But anyway.
Yeah.
But to see like 5 shots and then like an overlay of a vase, like turning in the air, or like CG, it would just look so hokey. But yeah.
Yeah, and I think just kind of wrapping that up, it's the whole notion where, yes, comics are sequential art where you follow one panel by the other, but it's a way of tricking our brain. You don't actually have to read it that way. It's just the way that we've been trained to read comics. Honestly, a good comic should be great sequentially, but seeing the whole page as its own image should also be something of substance, something worthwhile. And I think that's the sign of a really great artist, when it's just not sequentially making sense, but when the whole makes sense as well.
And also, that's also why the Comixology reader, the way that when you read Comixology on that mode where it zooms into each panel, you kind of lose that, right? You lose just that sense of looking at the whole page. So something.
Yeah. No, agreed. I think it's something lost there. And, you know, I will say, if this has not been your cup of tea, again, there's a lot of continuity, a lot of history behind Vision and the storyline. I think there are other superhero dramas that do humanize characters that are done well, maybe that have a little bit more action and adventure in them. But I would even say, Julie, for example, if you're looking for something that was kind of like this, but maybe had a little bit more action progression in the plot, something like, I don't know how you would feel about this, Mike, but something like Invincible, I would say, might work by having humane characters in these sort of superhero settings.
I'm not personally a fan, but it is decent. But I always recommend Alan Moore stuff. So like we did Swamp Thing a few years ago, and I always recommend Miracle Man and Watchmen. But
probably Watchmen is a de facto go-to.
I always get like, oh, you'd like Paper Girls.
Paper Girls is actually pretty good.
It's fantastic.
I thought you said you didn't read comic books.
Well, I read like 3 pages of it. Okay. Vision is the first book I've actually finished.
Okay.
Okay.
Like, there was a copy of Wolverine that Jolie left in my house for the longest time. And you know when you just can't get into something and you read it, and then you're like, oh, I'll get back to it. And then you read the first 3 pages again, and then it just sits for months, and then you read it. Yeah. That's what happens. And then my house burns down, and then it fucking disappears. Yeah, excuse my language, but yeah. But yeah, like that's usually what I get. It's like stuff that I don't like to read. Even though yes, Paper Girls for the first 3 pages of it was very good. Until like this time travel-y stuff started happening and I was like not into it. I don't know. I just like heroes. You know what I mean? Like just give me a good superhero comic book with some. I really liked that there were some meaningful themes in this one, though.
So, Watchmen?
Yes. Do you
I
own
think-
that?
Yes.
Okay. I'll read that then.
There we go. Mike, you should be happy.
Yeah, very happy.
Okay, and Alicia
Always.
says you should. Big thumbs up. Awesome. So everyone, we could talk more about this book, but I'm going to have to go soon. I want to thank everyone for a great conversation. And the next time we have a session, I will have the date up on our Facebook page soon. I don't have it in front of me right away. We're not reading a superhero comic.
Oh, boo!
I know. We're returning to a artist who we actually seen before, but she's not writing this particular book. So you may remember a while ago we read a story, a little graphic novel that was by Brianna Thumler. And we actually found out that she did an adaptation of Anne of Green Gables.
Oh!
So we're going to be reading that.
Get out of town!
Yep.
That is so funny because I was just deciding like this week that that's the next book I want to read.
Oh, cool.
Not this comic, but the book. But this is perfect.
Which is why I brought the dragon, because it's green as well. So, well, it was actually right next to me, but
On theme.
Have you read the book, Jolie?
Yes.
Okay.
I
Sorry,
also recommend Anne with an E. Okay.
it was a strong no from Alicia.
Hated. Do you know what I hated? I actually started watching it. It was like, you know what? I don't like this because I grew up on Road to Avonlea and the CBC versions of everything from like the early 80s and 90s. But it it was like candy, like licorice wrapped in chocolate. It became like, you know, it became a guilty pleasure.
It sounds really bad, actually. Chocolate covered licorice.
That's why and Alicia's putting it departs too much from the book, and that's why I liked it.
Oh, I
Because
see.
its departure from the book explored themes. It made Anne more woke than she probably would have been for a girl in that time. Um, but it explored themes that I think that are important for kids who are probably going to watch Anne with an E on Netflix nowadays. So,
Hmm. Well, I'm
yeah.
going to admit I've never read Anne of Green Gables. So this is my first Anne of Green Gables experience. So hopefully you can all make it for the next session. I'll post that online. And with that said, I'm going to have to run. So heroes, stay tuned to the Facebook page. Julie, thanks for joining us this time. And yes, I'm looking forward to this too. Thanks, Alicia. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night. Stay safe.
All right. See ya.
See ya.